Welcome to the Grow Your Independent Consulting Business podcast. I'm Melissa Lieberman, a fellow IC and business coach. On this podcast, I teach you to become a consistently booked independent consultant without becoming a pushy salesperson or working 24/7. If I can do it, you can too. Listen on to find out how. Welcome to episode 259 of the Grow Your Independent Consulting Business podcast. This is Melissa Lieberman, and today we're talking about 5 ways that you can leverage to increase your consulting capacity without working more. This is exciting. I can't wait for us to dive into this topic because you only have so many hours in the day. You only have so many hours in the week. You want to have flexibility and space to do whatever you want to do on a personal level and work on engagements that are fulfilling. And we're going to leverage these 5 ways that you can increase your capacity so that you have time for all of that. So let's talk about the agenda and then we'll dive right into the 5 ways to increase your capacity. So first, I'll share with you the companion resource that goes with this. We haven't talked about it in a long time, so I'm excited to remind you of this resource. Then we'll talk about just getting on the same page. What are we talking about when we say capacity? And then why is that important? And then I'll walk you through the 5 types of capacity, 5 ways that we're going to increase your capacity without working more. And then I'm going to dive into each one of them individually and give you a good understanding of what each of them is. You likely have heard of all of these ways to increase your capacity or to expand your capacity, but I want to highlight them for you because you're probably overlooking some, if not all of them, or at least 4 out of the 5 anyway. So we want to take advantage of all of these levers for you in your business. So that's what we're going to do when we walk through each one of the capacity levers. And then we'll wrap it up with how to choose what to do because you can't tackle all of these at once. So I'll give you some thoughts on and a framework to use to figure out what to do with this episode so that it doesn't add a bunch of to-dos to your to-do list. Instead, that it gives you a really clear direction about where to start. So that is what we're here for. The companion resource for today's episode, we've talked about quite frequently, Grow Your Consulting Business, my book, but we haven't talked about very often or lately on this podcast is chapter 13 in this book that I wrote, Grow Your Consulting Business. It focuses on the balance of working on your business with working in your business and a system for that to manage your time. So if you haven't recently read that chapter or you haven't downloaded the book or you haven't purchased it on Amazon, I highly recommend go download it and purchase it on Amazon. You can find it at consultingbusinessbook.com. Okay, that will go really well along with this episode, which is all about increasing your capacity without working more. So let's just get on the same page first. What is capacity? You know what this is, but I always love to just start off and level set here. In this context, we're talking about capacity as the maximum number or the maximum amount of something that you can handle, that you can produce, that you can absorb at one time without strain or decline in quality. So we're talking about what is it that you can take on in your business without strain or decline in quality. Most of us would think that that's just simply the number of hours that we have in a given week. Maybe you're running a business and you've dedicated 30 hours a week to your business. A lot of us think of capacity as just that simple number, and it's so much more than that. And so that's why we want to talk through all of this here today so that you can increase your capacity without working more hours. In fact, you could even work fewer hours, which would be amazing, right? Okay, so why is capacity important? Of course, you know this, but let me just reiterate it for you. You're the business. Your capacity impacts your revenue ceiling, your lifestyle ceiling, your sustainability ceiling. Without managing your capacity, you're going to hit a wall. You're going to hit an income plateau. You may burn out or feel stuck in feast or famine. When we increase your capacity without adding hours, that's where you're able to start creating more control for yourself, more flexibility, and the ability to make more money without working more, perhaps even working less to make that increased amount of money. So that's the point of this episode, to help you recognize all the types of capacity that are available to you as an independent consultant and to understand how to expand each one of these so that you can make more without working more. How fun is that? Okay, let's first walk through what are the 5 ways to increase your capacity as an independent consultant. And then we're going to talk about each one of them. So, first is delivery capacity. Second, growth capacity. Third is mental and emotional capacity. Fourth is what I'll call an intentional surge in capacity. And fifth is making sure you don't have leaks in your capacity. So we can expand it, not allow it to leak out. Let's dive into each one of these. We'll drill down and talk about how to increase each one of them. And in more detail, what is each aspect of capacity that we're talking about here, these 5. So, what I'm going to do is drill into each of the 5. I'm going to give you a definition. I'm going to give you 2 to 3 ways to increase that type of capacity. And then we'll end it with a question on to help you uncover where your opportunities are. So be sure to click on the show notes, the full show notes. You'll find that link in your podcast player. It will take you over to my website where we've got all of this listed out, these questions. So if you're driving or walking or running or just not even at your desk, you don't have to worry about furiously scribbling them down. They're all documented for you. Okay, so first let's talk about delivery capacity. So the definition of delivery capacity is your ability to produce high quality client work within the time you've allocated. It's not about how many hours you have, it's about how much output and value you're generating per hour. Because 2 consultants can have the same calendar and wildly different delivery capacity. So, again, I want to emphasize this is not about how many hours you have available. You might have planned out your business and said, okay, I'm going to work 25 hours on client delivery and 5 on my business. This delivery capacity is not about the 25, although, of course, that's a component to it. But you've allocated those 25 hours. Let's look at how you make more use of them, how you generate more value from them. And we'll talk about these 3 areas to do that. So the first is systematizing your repeatable work, right? Building templates, frameworks, SOPs, so that you're able to reuse and re-leverage any work that you've done. I find so often that this is, of course, something that I'm not pointing out to you that you've never considered. I'm sure you've considered it. It's probably on your to-do list. But so often we put this as a low priority because we're working on the client delivery and we think to ourselves, "Oh, I'll get to that at some point." And you put it into some kind of folder on your SharePoint or in your Google Drive, and then that stuff just piles up rather than creating those as you go. Creating them as you go. I was talking with a consultant the other day and drew her on a piece of paper on my iPad the simplest tool I said I've ever created, which is just a line down the middle of the piece of paper, up and down, right? Not side to side, up and down. So on the left-hand side, I said, you're on the left-hand side, you're taking notes for yourself. You're working with the client. You're thinking about whatever's going on in the meeting, for example. And then on the right-hand side of that line, you're writing down ideas for your own business about how you can turn what's happening into a framework or making notes about how you want to templatize this. Constantly thinking about that dual value for you and your business, your client rather, and your business. We want that dual value from the work that you're doing. And quite frankly, it comes back to impact the client so positively as well. Because when you're always zooming out and thinking about how this applies to all types of clients, how you can leverage this across your clients, how you can make whatever's happening more valuable, then of course, not only does it add value to your own business, but of course, it also can come back and add value to that client because you're thinking about things in a much more framework type way versus just whatever is happening at the moment at that client, or in addition to, should say, in addition to whatever's happening at that client. So that's the first piece of expanding your delivery capacity without adding more hours, is systematizing your repeatable work so you can get faster and faster as you work with clients who have similar situations that you are helping them to address. And then the second component of improving or increasing your delivery capacity is reminding yourself to stay in your zone of genius. I know this is a little bit of a coachy term, but at the end of the day, you want to be staying in your zone of genius because not every hour of client work is equal. When you're doing work that lights you up, when you're doing work that feels aligned with what it is that you're building up for your expertise or your niche or what you want to be sought after for, when the type of work that you're doing feels like it fits within the direction that you're heading, it's so much less taxing on you. There's so much less friction than when you're doing work that you wish you weren't doing, that you regret taking on, that you know you could be using your time in a better way. Of course, that's draining for you. So you get to choose. Are you going to take on a client? Yes or no? Is this client helping you to expand the way you're thinking and operating? Or is it one that's going to be keeping you stuck in some way? And if you decide to take on a client, even if it has red flags, thinking about how can you delegate, automate, stop offering the stuff that grinds you down. Just because you can do something doesn't mean you should do something. I'll say it again. Just because you can do something doesn't mean that you should be doing that. And then the third component to expand your delivery capacity is scoping tighter, looking at the way that you're building out your engagements and being more clear, ruthlessly clear about what the client's going to get, what you're going to deliver, what you're not going to deliver. Sometimes we worry that it's going to turn the client off if we're not clear upfront about what it is we'll do and what it is we won't do. But that's not less value. Tighter scope isn't less value. It's more value in less time for you to clarify the scope so the client is clear and you're clear, and there's not a lot of cycles wasted on both sides wondering if you're delivering what they expected and them wondering what you're going to deliver. The other component to this scoping, remember this, is that hourly billing is the enemy of delivery capacity, right? Because it rewards you for working and working more. When you bill by the hour, loose scope is not a problem. It's your paycheck. And so you want to be looking at how can you increase the amount of money you're making per hour with the type of work you're doing, with the amount of value you're delivering for those clients, with the way the clients value what you do, and then the pricing model that you're choosing. So those are the three components to increase your delivery capacity. Again, systematizing your repeatable work, staying in your zone of genius, whether that's qualifying clients out that you know aren't going to be a good fit for you and will cost you, both by way of maybe they're not paying as much as other types of engagements would, and they're also draining on you. That's a double tax, if you will. And then finally, increasing it by having a tighter scope and the type of pricing model that is aligned to you expanding your delivery capacity. Because if you can pack more into every hour that you're working on a client and creating bigger results for them, it doesn't matter how many hours you're working, it matters what that impact is. And you want your pricing to align to that philosophy. So, as we wrap up this first component to increase your delivery capacity, the question that I would encourage you to ask and answer for yourself in your business is, what part of your client delivery consistently takes more time and energy than it should? And again, we'll put these questions in the show notes. But be thinking about your delivery capacity. I gave you 3 ways to increase your delivery capacity without adding more hours. Of course, there are other ways as well. So you want to uncover those for yourself in your business. Okay, number 2, growth capacity. Let's talk about the definition. Growth capacity is your ability to build the business while running the business. This goes back to chapter 13, working on the business and working in the business. This is the time and energy that you invest in things that don't pay you today, but pay you more tomorrow. Your growth capacity. It's things like business development, building intellectual property, creating content, deepening relationships, refining your positioning. That's what growth capacity is. What I find is that most consultants have almost zero growth capacity because delivery eats into everything. We talk about this all the time, right? That feast or famine cycle. You finish a project, you have no pipeline, you panic. But listen, this is not a business development problem, it's a capacity problem. When we think it's a business development problem, we're solving the wrong thing. It's a capacity problem. And the way to increase this without working more, a couple of them, is for you to protect small, consistent blocks. You don't need a full free day. You don't need 5 hours on Friday. You just need 2 non-negotiable hours a week or 4 non-negotiable hours a week on the calendar that don't move. Growing in every direction. Pick 1 or 2 growth activities. I call them pathways in the lead gen sprint. Pick 1 or 2 growth activities or pathways that actually produce results and then drop the rest. Stop looking at all the different things that people are telling you to do and focus on what works for you and your business and your type of ideal client. Because focused growth compounds faster than scattered effort, of course, right? The third way that I would recommend for you to increase your growth capacity without working more is to account for your business as a client. You've got your business on your revenue plan. So you want to think about, okay, my business is going to take this much time out of my overall number of hours when we look at capacity that way. I'm going to account for that instead of just assume that I have extra time that I can work on my business. So you're thinking about your own business as a client. You're putting that on your client roster in your revenue plan, and you're thinking about how you service how many of our clients you have, including yourself. I've said this to you so many times, but if you've heard it before, I want to emphasize it. If you haven't heard it, it's so important. And that is, you would never just blow off a meeting with a client. You would never just say, "Oh, I'm really busy today. I'll see if I can get to you on Friday." You just wouldn't do that. But you do that to your own business all the time. And we don't want that to happen for you. So that's another way to increase your growth capacity is to put it in your overall plans, bake it into your business model, put it into your scheduling. Make sure that the way you're pricing work takes into account that you have a client who is a non billable client that you devote 4 hours a week to. Bake it in instead of just treating it like, well, I'm going to get to that if I have extra time, or I get to that on Fridays. And then invariably, you know how Friday goes, something else pops up and you kick the can down the road again. We don't want that to happen for you. So, to increase your growth capacity, look at those 3 ways that I just described to you. And also ask yourself the question, where are you unintentionally trading away the time or energy needed to build your future pipeline? You're not doing this on purpose, but it's a huge impact for you. So you want to figure out how to tackle it. Okay, let's talk about the third component of your capacity, how to increase your capacity without working more. And that is the mental and emotional capacity. Honestly, if I picked any of these 5, it would always be this one. Let me give you the very simplest example of what I'm talking about, then we'll talk about the definition. But you know this, like every time you're up against a deadline or you have to get something done and you kind of kick into gear, you invariably create an amazing deliverable in such a short amount of time. What ends up wasting so much time is when we give ourselves a lot of time to complete something, we fall into perfectionism, we procrastinate, we over perfect something, over complicate something, over analyze something. All of that comes down to the emotional side of running a business. If you chose only one of these today and started working on increasing and expanding your mental and emotional capacity, I can assure you, and I hesitate there because I don't like using such a promising word, but truly, if you can work on increasing your mental and emotional capacity, every time I see this, when you have more capacity to deal with disappointment, when you have more capacity to deal with frustration, when you have more capacity to deal with fear and scarcity, when you're able to deal with all of those things and keep going and not let it take you out of the game for hours or days or weeks or months or quarters, when you're able to deal with that and allow it to be part of the process, but not stop you or slow you down, that's when you start to unlock so much opportunity for yourself and so much bigger ability to accomplish what it is that you want to be accomplishing in so much less time. Okay, that's even the preamble to this topic. It's so important. So let's talk about the definition of mental and emotional capacity. This is your ability to feel uncertainty, to feel pressure, to be visible and still move forward without shrinking your goals, shrinking your identity, or shrinking the actions that you're taking, the number of actions, the type of actions, the quality of actions. This is the capacity that most consultants completely ignore because it's not showing up on your calendar. It's not something that's showing up on your to do list, but you felt it. It's that day, like I just described to you. It's like that day that you have 4 free hours and you just can't make yourself do that business development, as an example, and you waste the 4 hours. This happens all the time. You're a human, but the more you can manage and expand this emotional and mental capacity, the more unlimited you become as a business owner. So let's talk about 3 tangible ways to increase it without working more, to increase this mental and emotional capacity. The first is building your tolerance for discomfort. I just alluded to this, but the goal is not to avoid hard emotions. Quite frankly, if you're avoiding hard emotions, you're playing so much smaller than what you're capable of achieving. If you don't feel fear, if you don't feel disappointment, if you don't feel panic, if you don't feel stress, then you are likely setting goals that are so well below what you're capable of achieving. You're not pursuing the type of work that you're capable of landing. You're not charging what you are capable of charging. The goal is not to avoid these emotions, it's to get really good at processing them and not making them a problem so they are not taking you out for a day or a week or a month or a quarter or even a year. I've seen this happening over and over for some consultants for 10 years. We don't want this for you. Stop letting these emotions stack up. When you don't process your emotions, and believe me, I even hesitate to say this out loud. I've told you before, I grew up on a cattle ranch. There are no emotions allowed growing up. Absolutely none. But when you don't process them and that stress adds up, that fear adds up, that panic adds up, of course, it's almost like just wearing this incredibly heavy backpack that you can barely move. It's like going through SEAL training. You're wet and you're underwater and you're wearing all your clothes and you're trying to get out of, swim. It's almost impossible. But when you can process those emotions and acknowledge, listen, I'm feeling incredibly panicked today. My client just said they were going to wrap up our engagement early and I need to figure out what I'm going to do next. Of course, I can feel panic, but not letting that take over, not letting that run unmanaged, not letting that under the cover in your mind and not even acknowledging it. And then, thirdly, expanding your emotional range. This is where you are focusing and purposefully getting yourself to the place of being okay with and even seeking out fear, doing things that make you afraid, that make you feel rejected, like purposefully creating those situations so that you can realize like this sucks, absolutely sucks, but it's not going to hurt you. And it definitely shouldn't keep you from avoiding doing something. So those are some of the areas or tools that you can leverage to start expanding your emotional and mental capacity. The question you want to ask yourself here is when you have time available, but you still struggle to focus or decide or move your work forward, what unresolved emotion or recurring stress is in the background for you most often? I'll say it again. When you have time available, but you're still struggling to focus or decide or move important work forward, what unresolved emotion or recurring stress is most often in the background? Address that that you can expand your emotional and mental capacity. Okay, number four, we talked about not working more. So I want to be clear that that is not something that we want to do. That's what I promised you when we started this episode. However, there are peaks and valleys. You're not going to work the same amount every week. In fact, I would highly recommend that you build your calendar in a way that doesn't require you to do that. For example, I typically work with my clients 3 weeks out of four. So on the fourth week for private clients, we have a week off of coaching so they can focus on implementing the work that we've been talking about and having that space to do so, or even more space to do so, or going through a sprint. You've heard about my lead gen sprint. If you've listened to this podcast for any period of time, that's an example of this fourth area, which is what I'll call an intentional surge. This is where you have an ability and bake it into your calendar, bake it into your operating procedures, bake it into the way that you do business. The ability to temporarily operate above your normal capacity on purpose with a plan and with boundaries. Again, you have busy seasons and hopefully you have low seasons or off seasons. The difference is whether you choose the surge or you fell into it. And so that's why this one is in integrity to share with you, because this is not about you working more and just doing surges and surges or sprints. This is about you baking this in intentionally, an intentional surge into your business plan so that in the macro level, you're not working more. You're just putting a lot of work into a surge and then giving yourself some time off afterward, giving yourself time for recovery, taking the summer off if you want to, whatever that looks like for you. But leveraging this concept of a surge can set you up to have more flexibility, can set you up to have more space in your calendar because you pack in some work when you know that it's dark outside and snowing and it doesn't matter. And then you free yourself up to enjoy the summer months, as an example. So, the definition of this intentional surge is the ability to temporarily operate above your normal capacity on purpose. Just want to say this again for you, with a plan and with boundaries. And the three ways to increase it without working more in the macro level. Of course, you'll be working more in the surge, but it frees you up to actually work less if you add everything up in a quarter or in the course of a year. Number one, you want to decide before it starts when it ends. This is so important because a surge without an end date is just overwork with a better name, right? You talk yourself into a surge. You don't really put any parameters around it. And what you end up doing is just increasing the amount of work that you're doing. It's kind of like working out, right? You could do 20 minutes on the treadmill. Then that feels really easy and normal. And then you do 30 and you just keep increasing your ability to work out. We're not doing that with respect to your work. We want to have this intentional surge, an intentional period of time that has a start date and an end date, and not just a new way to, increase your capacity over time and not really notice that you're working more and more and more and getting used to it. The second way to increase your capacity using an intentional surge is that you're building in recovery also. You're blocking lighter days at the back end of the surge. And you're scheduling what that might look like. Maybe it's a day off. Maybe it's a day off at a hotel by yourself. Maybe it's a retreat of some sort for your business. It's not catching up on everything you were not focused on during the surge. This is you having a re-entry process that's very clear and very tight so that you're not taking on and just trying to always feel like you're catching up on something. And then thirdly, protect what you drop and what you don't. Obviously, something's going to have to give during the surge. So part of this intentional surge, not only the time frame that you're attaching to it and what you want to accomplish during the surge, but also what's going to happen with the things that you normally do. Decide intentionally. what's going to happen. Maybe you want to plan a surge for April and it's all about lead generation, as an example. Well, start thinking now, okay, I'm going to get a little bit ahead on these other things so that I focus on that surge and then I don't have a big pile of work waiting for me when the surge is over, as an example. You decide other things can drop. You just don't do them for a few weeks or a month or however long your surge is. Decide intentionally what it looks like during the surge of what you're going to accomplish, how long the surge is, and what you're not going to do, and what it looks like when you're done. So, the question to consider when you're thinking about a potential surge is when you enter a busy stretch, how often do you find an end date, recovery time, and clear trade offs in advance? The answer is probably not very often, right? So, the second part of that is how can you start implementing a process to define those things? When is the next surge? And how can you build that out in a way that sets you up for success to increase your capacity overall, not just trying to work so much and then catch up with the things that you missed, which ends up doubling or tripling the amount of capacity required because you've got the amount of work you're doing, you've got the emotional overload on top of it, and then you've got a bunch of second guessing and worrying about everything that's piling up. For sure, you don't want all of that to happen. If you're going to leverage this way of increasing your capacity periodically, you want to do it in a way that sets you up to increase your capacity overall. Okay. And then the fifth one is you finding and fixing your capacity leaks. Because you can put all of these processes, all of these ways of increasing your capacity into action that we've just talked about, all four of them, but it really won't matter if it's draining out at the bottom. You might be losing hours every week to these leaks that you don't even notice. Things like blurry boundaries, invisible work you're not realizing you're doing, you're not tracking. You do so much work that you don't account for. That emotional weight that you're carrying without realizing it. And a slow drift away from the work that actually fits you. There's so many different ways that leaks can happen. And as a result, I decided to make it its own episode. So next week, we're going to talk about the 5 capacity leaks that you can't see, but also can't afford to ignore in your business. So you want to stay tuned for next week, a little teaser. We're going to go into so much more detail about those capacity leaks so that when you're implementing those first 4 buckets that we talked through that allow you to expand your capacity without working more, that you don't let the leaks go out of the bucket and end up back at where you were. So those are the 5 ways to increase your capacity. Now let's wrap up this episode by talking about where to start. Of course, you cannot do all of them at once. You could, but it's not going to be as effective for you. So we want to help you to prioritize where to start here. So pick the one that's costing you the most. Let me help you figure out what that is. So let's look at these 5 questions, and that will help you to pick the one that will make the biggest difference. Then you can come back and do the next one and the next one and the next one. So let's go through these 5 questions. Are you constantly reinventing the wheel on client work? If so, you want to start with delivery capacity. Are you always busy, but never growing the business or focused on business development until it's an emergency? Then you want to focus on growth capacity. If you feel that you have time, but not the energy, or you notice yourself procrastinating or being a perfectionist or overcomplicating things, start with the mental and emotional capacity lever. If you want to adjust your calendar so that you've got better seasonality, so that you've got the ability to work hard and play hard, and you don't have that, or you notice it just keeps compounding. You're working hard, and then you just notice you keep working harder and harder and harder. Then go start with the intentional surge. And finally, if you feel like you're doing all the right things and something is still off, you are not able to feel like you have the capacity to do with what you need to do, then you probably have leaks. And so that's why you want to also stay tuned for next week as well. And we'll dive into spend another 30 or 40 minutes and dive into those leaks to help you so that you're not filling the bucket with a bunch of water and it's all draining out. All right, my friend, thank you for tuning in today. I am excited for you to increase your capacity without working more. Challenge yourself to do that. And I will see you again next week. Take care.
Thanks for joining me this week on the Grow Your Independent Consulting Business podcast. If you liked today's episode, I have 3 quick next steps for you. First, click subscribe on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to make sure you don't miss future episodes. Next, leave me a review in your podcast app so other independent consultants can find and benefit too. And finally, to put the ideas from today's episode into action, head over to melissalieberman.com for the show notes and more resources to help you grow your consulting practice from your first few projects into a full-fledged business. See you next week.